There are quite a few reasons for me to skip The Little Mermaid entirely, and I've mentioned some of these reasons before in another video, so I'll just cut to the chase. The effects look like shit. Oh, and so do the ones in the movie. Whether the lighting is too murky, you can't see anything, the CGI isn't finished to the point where someone's head isn't even attached to their body, and is so photorealistic with the black eyes and puffy faces that it's fucking creepy. I mean, why does Sebastian have Botox? The original was an hour and 20. Very fast paced, but still gave you all the depth that you needed. This new one is 2 hours and 15 minutes. So if you already know what's going to happen, and most of the new characters and new songs, let's face it, probably won't add anything new, and is a complete waste of time for the actors involved, and filler for the audience who just wants to see a movie as quickly as possible, what exactly is the point? Judging by the soundtrack, which I have listened to, I don't think David Diggs is even trying. I mean, honestly, I could do a better Jamaican accent than whatever the fuck he's doing. It sounds like he's doing an SNL skit as Sebastian as opposed to a legitimate movie. In the original 2D classic, animals could dance, sing, and move around like human beings, making them feel more alive. In the remake, when they're singing, they just swim, crawl, and fly around like the animals that they are, and it was boring the first time, it's boring now. Hell, if Scuttle seriously started singing and dancing like an actual human in the movie, it would be a hell of a lot more entertaining because of just how surreal and stupid of a scenario it could be. Again, judging by the soundtrack, Melissa McCarthy does have that menacing sound Ursula needs, I will give her that, but at the same time, she doesn't exactly have the charisma Pat Carroll brought to the character that made her, at the very least, so fun to watch in her diabolical schemes. Ursula was hands down one of the best Disney villains ever, just based on Pat Carroll's voice alone. Even though Lin-Manuel Miranda said in his Playing with Puppies episode that the original score was perfect, he added on new songs anyways and erased the lyrics of some of the more iconic songs for political reasons based on the output of SJWs that would never be satisfied by anything. More on that. In fact, there's probably a timestamp in the description below where you can skip to that section entirely. In fact, yeah, I had an entire segment from a separate non-review of The Little Mermaid that I had planned out, and it's really the only salvageable part that I had left of it, so here you go. Now, you might say, if nothing else, the fact that they're adapting The Little Mermaid into live action, requiring a lot of different special effects and stunt work, the negative publicity in social media that has surrounded the cast and crew, makes this remake significantly more difficult of a production than the original. Let me tell you a little story about a man named Howard Ashman. He was a playwright and lyricist who was brought in by Disney to work on the original Little Mermaid. And at that point, when maybe a couple years before Oliver and Company came out, the Disney Animation Studio was actually not part of Disney Studios. It was off location next to a fucking bowling alley. But when Ashman was brought in as a lyricist and a co-producer, creating so many changes to the original vision that they were going for with this movie, the fact that he had to change Sebastian from a minor character who was an English butler under sea named Clarence into a Jamaican, and in order to change the musical style so that it can better incorporate the character. The fact that he worked so closely with the story writers and the animators so that he can weave each song in meticulously so that the lyrics actually emphasize what the character is going through and move the story forward. Him as a co-producer having enough power to actually cast, and in one case even fire actors based off of their acting and singing capability. Due to single-handedly, with his work on The Little Mermaid and the work that he would eventually do on Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, shaped what the Disney Renaissance became and what Disney, as a gigantic company that dug itself out of the grave for supposedly the final time, made such a huge, lasting impression. There's a documentary on Disney Plus called Howard that I would highly recommend. It gives so much more information and depth than I possibly ever could with his story. Now, you might be asking, what exactly is so difficult about that in comparison to this? Howard Ashman was HIV positive while he was making The Little Mermaid. And unfortunately, when he was working on Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, he was succumbing to the effects of AIDS to the point where he, as far as I know, didn't see Beauty and the Beast, definitely not Aladdin, in its entirety, in its completed form. In fact, producers were so fed up with him that they wanted to fire him over Part of Your World because they thought it was that boring of a song, even though the remake itself is just emphasizing how great a singer Halle Bailey is just off of Part of Your World alone. But even with everything that he had to go through, he put 110% effort into it. He brought on his collaborator from Broadway, Alan Menken, who is still working with Disney to this day and is a part of the remake to his credit. Dude is single-handedly known for bringing Broadway into cartoons, for acknowledging the similarities between Broadway musicals and animated musicals, emphasizing what live-action musicals without any magic or fantasy whatsoever, or with, if we're being completely honest, could possibly never do. And all I can think of is how Alan Menken, his collaborator and dear friend, and Miranda, who was so influenced by The Little Mermaid that he actually named his first son after Sebastian. And no doubt, the influence Ashman had on him is probably the reason he's so thrilled to work with Disney in the first place. How do they respect his legacy when they're remaking the movie? Well, the two of them thought that giving Awkwafina a rap that completely differs from the rest of the music original and the new songs that Miranda created. And Awkwafina rapping, that's just such a fucking great idea. Listening to Awkwafina rap is as gorgeous and awe-inspiring as Gilbert Gottfried singing opera. I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? That's one of my best one-liners. I fucking love that one. Not to mention, and this is the real kicker, they basically censored two of his most iconic songs, Kiss the Girl and Poor Unfortunate Souls, out of political sensitivities. Things that I'm sure if you were to ask them in interviews, they would say, oh, Howard would totally be okay with that. He would totally understand the circumstances. Bullshit. Bullshit for a few specific reasons. The first and simplistic one, as tragic as it does sound, he's dead. He died before the internet was a thing. He died before the culture became what it is today. So there's no way of guaranteeing what he would have thought of 2022 back in the 90s when he was going through significantly more difficult things. And I'd just like to point out that the original version of his song Arabian Nights mentioned how in Agrabah they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. So even he had his problems. Second, there's an entire video on YouTube explaining the difference between animated musical movies and live-action musical movies, and his thoughts on the notion really go against the idea of him actually approving a live-action remake based on one of his works. And don't get me wrong, there are so many live-action musicals I love that I think kind of go against his theories, but when you're remaking a movie where mermaids and sea witches are floating underwater with effects that go from unfinished to fucking atrocious, I'm with him on that one. But the third and most pronounced reason is, by censoring the lyrics and changing them, it changes the story in a way that doesn't really make sense. Ariel actually wanted Eric to kiss her, in case her selling her soul and her voice for a pair of legs wasn't evident enough. Not to mention, she literally needed him to kiss her so that she doesn't go back into the water and serve as Ursula's hostage/slave. And speaking of Ursula, when it comes to Poor Unfortunate Souls, those complaints make the least amount of sense to me because you have a female hero and a female villain. So, there's no bias, there's no sexism or anything inherently into that. And not to mention, by eliminating all of the references to Ariel really wanting to go up into the human world in order to have a life for herself and have a life with someone else, by taking all of those things out of the supposed women manipulating other women with jealousy towards men. By taking that out of the story, you're taking away anything Ursula actually has to manipulate Ariel with. Seriously, without using Eric as a way to coerce Ariel into signing the agreement, she has no leverage over Ariel, so how does she get her to do it? It doesn't make any sense. And lastly, not Halle Bailey herself, but Disney's handling of the reaction towards Halle Bailey being cast. is where the fault lies in all of this ridiculous and fucking pathetic controversy. Based on Part of Your World alone, I would love to believe that Halle Bailey was hired on the basis of her acting and singing ability. Because when you listen to Part of Your World, not even like watching a clip of the movie, just listening to it, there are certain moments where she legitimately does sound like Jodie Benson, and it's amazing. The only reason that it's nowhere near as close as what Benson was going to is that, and this is a problem with the soundtrack itself and probably the movie itself, every song as time progresses gets louder, more bombastic. The singers begin to emote a hell of a lot more. They enunciate all the lyrics and the vowels within them, that they're trying to outdo the original movie. And as I pointed out, you can't even... live action just can't show the emotion and the magic and whimsy that animation can. So already you've completely failed. But in any case, I desperately want to believe that she was hired on the basis of talent and merit, as opposed to her skin color and her ethnicity. And the only reason I don't, and keep in mind, what I'm about to say is strictly speculation, is strictly my opinion. I would love nothing more than to be wrong about this. The only reason I don't believe that is because of the publicity that has been surrounding her casting. Yes, there are people who would have hated the fact that a black girl was cast as Ariel regardless, and they should not be listened to. But that's the major fucking problem. Rather than ignore the people who were legitimately racist, deny any knowledge of their existence whatsoever, every interview from a cast member, from a crew member, from media outlets, from Disney itself, from fans, and from critics of the movie have been talking 90% of the time about Halle Bailey's race and ethnicity and nothing more. You have made the marketing and the anticipation or lack thereof entirely centered around someone being black. Do I really need to point out what is so fucking disgusting about it? And honestly, the producers, the directors, the corporation, Halle Bailey herself, could have just talked exclusively about what she brought to the role in regards to her theatricality, her acting capabilities, her amazing singing. But instead, they acknowledged that a racist person's comments hurt their feelings, that it affected their production. And guess what? You let racist people actually win. The second you let someone know that their comments hurt their feelings, they have power over you. And once they know that it affects you, they're going to do it over and over again. And it's going to affect, and not only that, it's going to affect the way other fans, potential fans, are going to see the movie. They're going to look at Halle Bailey and assume that she was hired just as a way to virtue signal. They're not going to see Ariel brought to life by an actress. They're going to see an actress playing a character. Not only that, whereas Miles Morales will forever be known as Spider-Man, not a replacement of the original Spider-Man, not black or brown Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Whereas Zoe Kravitz will be remembered as Catwoman, not black Catwoman, just Catwoman. Halle Bailey is going to be known, probably for the rest of her career, as a black version of Ariel. And I shouldn't even have to point out what's so fucking stupid and damaging about that. You can make the argument all you want that the fact that there's, I don't know, more representation at the very least makes it justified or worth it. But here's the thing. I've always been downright confused whenever people say that Disney has a quote-unquote lack of representation. And, you know, we can debate that, we can have an honest conversation, but in one video where I'm the only person speaking, all I can say is, I guess I've just seen more representation than the majority of people, or at least I can remember it more.